20 years of guarding the most dangerous secret in the Appalachian Mountains was about to collapse around us like a rotting barn in a windstorm. And the horrifying truth we would uncover would force us to question everything we thought we understood about the creature we had been sheltering since 1963. My sister Dorothy and I believed we were protecting him, offering him refuge on our isolated mountain property. We had no idea we were actually concealing him from something far more terrible than trophy hunters or curious hikers. We had no idea that he had been fleeing from a threat that would eventually track us all down. My name is Rosalie Warren, and in October 1983, I was 44 years old, living on the family sheep ranch in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia with my older sister Dorothy, who was 48. Our property sprawled across 350 acres of mixed hardwood forest and highland pasture, bordered by the Jefferson National Forest on 3 sides and accessible only by a single winding gravel road that climbed 4 miles up from the nearest county route down in the valley. It was remote, private, and absolutely perfect for the secret we had been keeping since we were young women barely out of girlhood. That Tuesday morning started like any other autumn day in the mountains. I was in the equipment barn, the air thick with the familiar, comforting smells of grease, gasoline, and old iron, working on our 1976 Chevrolet pickup truck's clutch assembly. My hands, calloused from a lifetime of ranch work, were stained black with transmission fluid. Dorothy had taken our old 1971 International Scout, a vehicle so dented and rusted it looked like it had survived a small war, to check the fence lines along the northern pasture. The radio sitting on the workbench was playing "Every Breath You Take" by The Police, a song that had been playing so constantly that year I could recite every lyric without thinking, its vaguely sinister melody a strange soundtrack to our quiet mountain life. October had brought the first serious cold snap to the highlands, and frost still sparkled on the grass in the shadowed areas where the morning sun had not yet reached, glittering like scattered diamonds across the hillside meadow. I was elbow deep in the truck's greasy guts when I heard the distinctive rumble of Dorothy's Scout coming up the main drive much faster than she normally drove it. She skidded to a stop outside the barn doors in a spray of gravel, and I could see from the expression on her weathered face that something had gone terribly wrong. "Rosalie, we have got ourselves a serious problem," she said, as she climbed out of the driver's seat and slammed the door behind her with a force that rattled the old vehicle's frame. There were no wasted words, no preamble. Dorothy had never been one for small talk, especially when trouble was brewing. My stomach dropped like a stone thrown into a deep well. I pulled my hands free and wiped them on a shop rag, the grease smearing into the worn fabric. "What kind of problem?" "There are surveyors working along the northern boundary line," she said, her voice tight with a tension I hadn't heard in years. "Official-looking types with government vehicles and all kinds of equipment spread out everywhere." "What kind of government people?" I asked, already feeling the familiar dread settling into my bones, a cold weight that had been our constant companion for 2 decades. "Couldn't tell from the distance I was keeping," she answered, pulling off her leather work gloves and stuffing them into the pocket of her worn Carhartt jacket. Her weathered face, a roadmap of every worry and hardship we'd ever faced, was creased with the kind of concern I hadn't seen since our father passed. "But they're marking trees with orange tape, taking soil samples with some kind of drilling equipment. One of them was carrying what looked like a hunting rifle, maybe a tranquilizer gun." She glanced around as though someone might be listening, even though we were completely alone on the property, miles from our nearest neighbor. "They're working maybe 2 miles from the cave system." The cave system, his home, the place we had been bringing food and supplies for 2 decades, our most carefully guarded secret. "Did they spot you watching them?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Don't think so," Dorothy replied, shaking her head. I stayed way back in the tree line the whole time, used the binoculars from the ridge. But Rosalie, if they're conducting some kind of official survey up there, if they're planning development or logging operations or mineral extraction or whatever government agencies plan these days, they might stumble right onto him. We both understood exactly what that would mean without having to say it aloud. 20 years of carefully maintained secrecy would be finished. Not just our secret, but his safety, his life, everything we had sacrificed and worked so hard to protect since we were young women. "I need to warn him tonight," I said, already stripping off my greasy work gloves and tossing them onto the workbench beside the radio. "Tonight, after dark, when there's no chance of anyone seeing me on the trail." Dorothy nodded grimly, her jaw set in that stubborn line I knew so well from a lifetime of working alongside her. "I'll keep watch on those surveyors tomorrow morning, see if I can figure out what exactly they're up to and how long they plan to stay. But Rosalie," she paused, her gaze meeting mine, heavy with unspoken fears. "Maybe it's finally time we started considering other options for him. We can't protect him forever if the federal government gets itself involved in whatever is happening up there." I didn't answer her because I didn't have an answer to give. How exactly do you relocate a creature standing 7.5 feet tall who has lived in the same cave system for at least 20 years? Where would he even go? What other place could offer him the same combination of isolation and protection and the trust of people willing to keep his existence secret? As I cleaned the transmission fluid off my hands at the old sink in the corner of the barn, my mind traveled backward through the years to the day everything started. Back to November 1963, when Dorothy and I first encountered the being we would eventually come to call Silas. November 1963 seems like another lifetime now, though certain moments from that month remain as vivid in my memory as if they happened yesterday morning. I was 24 years old then, fresh-faced and still learning how the world really worked. Dorothy was 28, and we had just inherited the ranch from our father, who had passed suddenly from a stroke that autumn while checking on the sheep in the upper pasture. We found him lying peaceful in the tall grass, with the mountains rising up behind him, almost like he had simply decided to take a nap and never woke up. The doctor said he probably never felt a thing, which was small comfort in those dark, hollow days that followed. We were still learning every corner and feature of the property, still discovering all the hidden places and boundaries our father had known by heart, but never had time to show us before he was gone. When the first major winter storm of the season came howling down from the north, it caught us almost completely unprepared. It was a brutal storm, one of the worst the old-timers in the valley said they could remember. 3 feet of heavy, wet snow fell in just over 2 days, accompanied by winds that knocked down trees and snapped power lines throughout the county, and temperatures that dropped well below zero at night. We lost electricity on the second day of the storm, and by the third morning we were running dangerously low on the firewood we had stacked near the house. Dorothy and I bundled up in every layer of clothing we owned and ventured out to the woodshed, which sat about 100 yards from the main farmhouse, to haul back enough split logs to keep us from freezing. That is when we heard it, a sound that did not belong in the howling chaos of the storm. Crying, or something very much like crying. Not animal exactly, not quite human either, but definitely a sound of distress and suffering. It was coming from the direction of the old equipment shed, a structure our grandfather had built back in the 1920s that we rarely used anymore since most of the antique farm machinery inside had rusted into uselessness decades ago. Dorothy and I exchanged confused glances through the swirling snow, our breath forming thick clouds in the frigid air. "Probably a wounded deer that got turned around in the storm," she said loudly over the wind, though her tone suggested she was not entirely convinced of her own explanation. We pushed through the deep drifts toward the old shed, And that is when we spotted the tracks. Massive footprints, easily 17 or 18 inches long, pressed deep into the snow and leading from the edge of the forest straight to the shed door, which stood slightly ajar despite the wind trying to slam it shut. "That is definitely not a deer," I said, stating the obvious because my mind could not process what I was actually seeing. Dorothy, always the braver of us two even when we were children, moved forward and pushed the heavy wooden door open wider on its rusted hinges. The crying sound stopped immediately, cut off as sharply as if someone had thrown a switch. In the dim grey light filtering through the snow-covered windows, we could see him clearly. He was crouched in the far corner of the shed, pressing himself against the old stone foundation wall, trying desperately to make himself smaller, an impossible task given his enormous size. He was covered head to toe in thick, greyish-brown hair that was matted and clumped with ice crystals. His shoulders were impossibly broad, his arms longer than seemed natural, his hands huge with thick fingers that ended in dark nails like an animal. But what struck me most powerfully were his eyes, dark as mountain pools, obviously intelligent and filled with unmistakable fear. He was shivering so violently that his teeth were chattering, and I realized with sudden shock that despite his massive size and thick covering of hair, he was suffering severely from exposure to the cold, possibly hypothermia, possibly dying right there in front of us. "Jesus Christ Almighty," Dorothy breathed beside me, her voice barely above a whisper. The creature made a low, rumbling sound in his chest, defensive and warning, clearly telling us to stay back. But there was profound weakness in that warning. Exhaustion. He had obviously been traveling through the worst of the storm for hours or maybe days, and had finally taken shelter in the only structure he could find that offered any protection from the killing cold. "Easy now," I said softly, using the same gentle tone I had learned for calming frightened horses and spooked sheep. "We are not going to hurt you. I promise we are not going to hurt you." Dorothy was staring at the creature with an expression that mixed amazement with genuine concern for his well-being. "Rosalie, he's freezing to death right in front of us. Look at him shaking like that. He can barely hold himself upright anymore." It was true. Despite his tremendous size and the thick hair covering his body, he was clearly in serious medical trouble. His body was shutting down. "We need to get him warm somehow," I said urgently. "Build a fire in here, bring him some blankets, get some hot liquid into him if he'll take it." "We can't possibly bring him to the house," Dorothy said, her practical nature asserting itself even in this impossible situation. "Even if we wanted to try, he's way too big to fit through the doors. And if he panics and tries to get away..." The creature made another low sound, much weaker this time, cutting off whatever Dorothy was about to say. His dark eyes closed briefly, and I watched him sway on his feet, nearly collapsing against the wall. "He is not going to survive the night if we don't do something right now," I said with desperate urgency. "Dorothy, please, we have to help him." My sister looked at the creature shivering in the corner, then at me with my pleading eyes, then back at the creature again. She was weighing impossible choices, I knew, but I also knew her heart. Finally, she nodded once, decisively. "Fine. I'll get the kerosene heater from the barn and those old horse blankets we keep in the tack room. You stay here with him. Make sure he doesn't collapse completely or try to run off into the storm before I get back." Dorothy disappeared into the white chaos of the blizzard, leaving me alone in that dim shed with a creature that should not exist outside of campfire stories and grainy photographs in sensationalist tabloids. I kept my distance, standing near the partially open door, watching as he struggled visibly to remain conscious and upright. His breathing had become labored, his constant shivering broken by longer pauses that worried me even more than the shaking. "Help is coming," I said to him, not knowing if he could understand a single word, but hoping my tone would communicate what my words might not. My sister went to get supplies to warm you up. Just hang on a little longer. Please just hang on." His eyes opened and focused on my face with surprising clarity. For a long moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, we simply looked at each other across that dim and freezing space, woman and mystery, separated by perhaps 20 feet of dirt floor and an impossible gulf of understanding. But in that moment of silent connection, I saw something that changed everything I thought I knew about the world and my place in it. Recognition, not recognition of me specifically as an individual, but recognition that I was trying to help him, that I was not a threat to his survival, that I meant him no harm. He made a soft sound, almost gentle despite coming from that massive chest, and he nodded. An actual nod, a human gesture of acknowledgement that confirmed beyond any doubt that there was an intelligent mind behind those dark eyes. He understood. He knew we were trying to save his life. Dorothy returned faster than I expected, loaded down with the kerosene heater, an armful of thick wool horse blankets that smelled of dust and long storage, a large thermos of the hot beef soup we had made the day before, and an extra bundle of firewood from the stack by the barn. Working together with practiced efficiency, born from years of partnership, we got the old potbelly stove in the corner of the shed lit and burning, then positioned the kerosene heater to provide additional warmth. The creature watched our every movement with those intelligent eyes, making no attempt to flee or defend himself. "I brought soup," Dorothy said uncertainly, holding up the dented thermos. "Don't know if he'll take it or if his stomach can even handle human food, but it's hot and it might help." I approached him slowly, moving with exaggerated care, holding out the thermos cup filled with steaming beef broth. The creature's broad nostrils flared as he caught the scent. His dark eyes moved from the cup to my face and back again, clearly weighing whether to trust this offering. Then, with surprising delicacy, he reached out and took the cup from me. He drank the entire contents in one long swallow, and I watched some of the desperate tension leave his massive shoulders as the warmth spread through his body. I refilled the cup twice more, and he drained each one with the same grateful urgency. The violent shivering had already decreased noticeably, and his breathing sounded steadier. Dorothy and I stayed in that shed for more than 3 hours as the storm continued to rage, feeding the fires, bringing more soup and fresh water, piling blanket after blanket over the creature's enormous form. By late afternoon, he was clearly no longer in immediate danger, though he remained weak and exhausted. As we moved toward the door to leave, the creature made a sound that stopped us. We turned back to find him sitting up more fully, his blanket-draped form filling the corner of the shed. He touched his chest with one massive hand and made a sound that was clearly deliberate, meant to communicate something specific. "Silas." Dorothy and I stared at each other in complete shock. He was telling us his name. "Silas," I repeated carefully, touching my own chest in mirror of his gesture. Then I pointed at myself. "Rosalie," then at my sister. "Dorothy." The creature's face showed something that looked almost like relief, like he had been carrying the terrible burden of being utterly alone and unacknowledged for so long that having someone finally recognize him as an individual felt like a gift. We had acknowledged his personhood. "We'll be back tomorrow morning, Silas," Dorothy said, her voice softer than I had heard it in months. "You rest now. Get warm." Standing in the equipment barn 2 decades later, that memory remained as vivid and powerful as if it had happened yesterday. That first terrifying and wonderful meeting had established the pattern for everything that followed. But now, with government surveyors working on our property boundary, I found myself wondering if the sanctuary we had provided was about to become a trap with no way out. That night I waited until well after midnight, when the moon had risen high enough to provide some light, before making the familiar trek to the cave system where Silas had made his home. I carried my heavy Maglite flashlight, a backpack stuffed with food supplies, and our grandmother's old Remington rifle, not for Silas, but for the black bears and occasional mountain lion that still prowled our property. The October night wrapped around me cold and clear. I had walked this winding path hundreds of times, knew every landmark as well as I knew the rooms of my own house. The entrance to the cave system was hidden behind a natural rock formation, almost completely covered by moss and mountain laurel. You would walk right past it without ever suspecting it was there. I flashed my light 3 times at the darkness of the cave entrance, our established signal. Within moments, I heard the sound of movement from deep inside, and then Silas emerged from the darkness into the moonlight. Even after 20 years, his appearance still had the power to take my breath away. He had aged, as we all had. There was more grey in his hair now, but standing 7 feet and 8 inches tall, he remained an absolutely imposing presence. "Sigh," I said quietly, using the shortened name we had adopted. "We have got ourselves a serious problem." He tilted his massive head, a gesture I had learned to recognize as focused attention. Over the years, we had developed a communication system that worked surprisingly well. Silas understood far more English than he could ever speak, and he had taught us some of his own vocalizations and gestures. I pulled out a small notebook and began sketching stick figures representing men with equipment, vehicles, and the general area where Dorothy had spotted them. Silas watched intently, and I saw his posture change immediately as understanding dawned. His broad shoulders tensed, his hands curled into massive fists. But it was not fear that I saw in his expression. It was something else, something that looked almost like recognition. Dread, like the return of an old nightmare. "Si, do you know something about this?" I asked urgently. "About why these people are here?" He made a sound, low and urgent, and gestured for me to follow him deeper into the cave. This was highly unusual. In 20 years, Silas had rarely invited us past the first chamber. I followed him through a narrow natural passage that opened into a larger chamber I had never seen before. My flashlight beam swept across the rough walls, and I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The walls were covered with markings, deliberate symbols and drawings made with purpose. Some looked ancient, carved deep into the stone and worn smooth by time. Others were much newer, probably made by Silas himself. They showed figures, many arranged in what appeared to be scenes or narratives. Some clearly represented creatures like Silas. Others were obviously human. But what made my blood run cold were the other drawings. Figures that looked wrong somehow, similar to Silas and his kind in their basic form, but different in ways that disturbed me on a primal level. More aggressive in their posture, with what appeared to be weapons in their hands, mouths open showing teeth. And in several drawings, these aggressive figures were shown attacking, chasing, and killing other figures that looked like Silas. "Jesus Christ, Si," I breathed. "What is all this?" He pointed at the aggressive figures with one massive finger, then made a series of harsh, guttural vocalizations I had never heard before, filled with what sounded like fear and bitter hatred. Then he pointed at himself and then toward the cave entrance behind us. He made a gesture we had established years ago, a motion with both hands that meant hiding or seeking safety. "You've been hiding from them," I said slowly, the pieces finally clicking into place with horrible clarity. "Not from humans. You've been hiding from others like yourself. That's why you came here in 1963. You were running from them." Silas nodded emphatically. Then he did something that shocked me more than anything else. He pointed at the newest drawings on the wall, crude but unmistakably clear illustrations showing men with equipment and vehicles. And beside them, he had drawn those aggressive figures, working together in obvious cooperation. "Wait," I said, my mind racing. "Are you saying that those surveyors out there, those government people, they are working with these other creatures, with the aggressive ones you've been hiding from?" Another emphatic nod. Silas moved to a different section of the wall where he had drawn what appeared to be a rough map of the region. Throughout the map were marks, most of them crossed out with large X's. Only a handful remained unmarked, and I realized with growing horror that one of those unmarked locations corresponded almost exactly to where our ranch sat. "They are looking for you," I said, understanding flooding through me like cold water. "They are looking for you specifically, and they have been searching for a very long time." Silas touched the wall gently, running his massive hand over some of the ancient carvings. He pointed at several figures grouped together in one of the oldest carvings, then made a sweeping gesture across his throat with one finger. Death. His family. I understood then that the aggressive creatures had killed his family, probably decades ago. He'd been running and hiding ever since. We had thought we were protecting Silas from human discovery. We had no idea he was actually hiding from something far more dangerous, something from his own world. I pulled out my notebook and started sketching frantically, trying to capture the key symbols. "I need to show Dorothy all of this," I said. "We need to understand exactly what we're dealing with." Silas walked me back to the cave entrance. Before I stepped out into the moonlight, he placed his massive hand gently on my shoulder, a gesture of trust and gratitude that never failed to move me deeply. "We will figure it out," I promised him again. "Just stay hidden, stay safe." He nodded slowly, then turned and disappeared back into the darkness of his cave. I began the long walk home, my mind churning. When I finally reached the farmhouse, exhausted and worried, I found Dorothy waiting in the kitchen with a fresh pot of coffee and an expression that told me she had news of her own. "Rosalie, we've got bigger problems than we thought," she said before I could speak. "While you were out there with Silas, I picked up something on the CB scanner, military frequencies, encrypted mostly, but I caught a few words before they switched channels." She looked at me with fear in her eyes. "Specimen containment," they said, "and lethal force authorized." I sat down heavily at the kitchen table. "It's worse than we imagined, Dot. Much worse. Silas isn't hiding from humans. He's hiding from others like himself. Aggressive ones that have been hunting his kind for generations. And somehow they've formed an alliance with elements of the government. They're working together." My sister's face went pale. "Jesus Christ, Rosalie, what in God's name have we gotten ourselves mixed up in?" I pulled out my notebook and started showing her the sketches. "Something that started long before either of us was born," I said grimly, "and something that is about to come to a head right here on our property." Dorothy and I spent the rest of that night bent over the kitchen table, poring over my sketches and trying to formulate a plan. By dawn, we had consumed 2 pots of coffee and filled 4 pages with ideas, most of which we crossed out as impossible. "We need more information," Dorothy said finally, rubbing her tired eyes. "Those surveyors, or whatever they really are, they're still out there. I need to get closer, see exactly what they're doing." "That's incredibly dangerous, Dot," I said. "They won't catch me," she interrupted firmly. "I've been hunting these mountains since I was 10. I know how to move without being seen." She stood and grabbed her heavy jacket. "You stay here, monitor the CB, and watch the access road. And Dot," I added, "take the Polaroid camera. If you see anything strange, document it." She was gone within minutes, her scout heading up the old logging trail. I spent the morning trying to maintain some semblance of normal routine while anxiety gnawed at my stomach. At 11, the CB crackled to life. "Rosalie, you there? You need to come see this yourself. I'm at the old logging road junction, about 3 miles northeast." I took the pickup as far as I could, then hiked the last half-mile to where Dorothy waited. She looked shaken, and Dorothy did not shake easily. She led me to a vantage point overlooking a clearing where the so-called surveyors had set up what was clearly a forward operating base. 3 large canvas tents, a military Humvee, and communications equipment bristling with antennas. At least 8 people moved around the camp with military precision, all of them armed, but that was not what made my blood run cold. At the edge of the clearing, secured inside a heavily reinforced holding pen, was a creature. It was similar to Silas, but where Silas's hair was grey-brown and his demeanor gentle, this creature had much darker hair, almost black, and radiated aggression. It paced the perimeter of its cage like a dangerous predator. This was one of them, one of the aggressive ones from the cave drawings. The hunters. Jesus, I breathed. They're using one of his own kind as a tracker. Look at that holding pen, Dorothy said, handing me her binoculars. They know exactly how dangerous it is. Through the binoculars, I watched as one of the armed men approached the pen with a raw haunch of deer meat. He pushed it through a slot, and the creature snatched it with frightening speed. Then the man said something to the creature, and the creature responded with what appeared to be deliberate communication. An exchange. They've trained it, I said, or made some kind of deal with it. It's cooperating with them. I saw them showing it something earlier, Dorothy added grimly. Looked like fabric or hair samples. They're giving it scent trails to follow. Silas's scent. We raced back to the ranch, my heart pounding with every jolt of the truck. When we pulled into our driveway, my heart stopped. Fresh vehicle tracks in the gravel. A business card was stuck into the crack of the front door frame. It was plain white, with crisp black text. Colonel Helena Vance, Department of Interior, Special Projects Division. Below the name was a phone number. On the back, written in neat blue pen, was a short message. Cooperation will be appreciated. Interference will be prosecuted. Call this number within 24 hours. It's a warning, Dorothy said flatly. Stay out of their way or face federal charges. 20 years, Dot, I said, crumpling the card in my fist. I am not about to hand him over now. Then what exactly do we do? She asked, spreading her hands in a gesture of frustrated helplessness. We're facing the United States military, Rosalie. We do what we've always done, I said, with more confidence than I felt. We protect him, but we need help. I thought for a moment. Do you remember Marcus Webb, the wildlife biologist from Virginia Tech who did that environmental impact study on our property back in '78? What about him? He's with the Fish and Wildlife Service now. Works on endangered species protection. If anyone might understand and take us seriously, it would be him. And more importantly, he has federal credentials of his own. He might be able to slow this operation down. That's assuming he believes us, Dorothy said skeptically. Rosalie, we'd be asking him to accept that Bigfoot is real, that we've been hiding one for 20 years, and that the government is hunting him with the help of evil Bigfoot. You have those Polaroid photographs, I reminded her, pointing to her jacket pocket. The images were grainy, but they clearly showed something extraordinary. We'll show him these. We'll tell him everything. I moved to the old rotary telephone on the kitchen wall and started dialing the Fish and Wildlife Regional Office. After being transferred twice, I finally reached the extension for Dr. Marcus Webb's office. His secretary said he was in the field. Tell him it's Rosalie Warren, I said urgently. Tell him it is critically urgent, life and death. Tell him I have evidence of a species he has only read about. Tell him it's about those unusual tracks he found in 1978 that Fish and Wildlife ordered him to forget about. There was a long pause. I'll make sure he gets your message immediately, the secretary said, and something in her tone suggested I had struck a nerve. Marcus Webb arrived at 9 o'clock that evening in a battered white Fish and Wildlife Service Bronco. He was a tall man in his early 40s with prematurely grey hair and the weary look of someone who had spent too many years fighting battles he couldn't win. Ms. Warren, he said, shaking my hand, your message said life and death. I drove 3 hours to get here. This could cost me my job just for listening. I understand the risk, I replied. Come inside. What we have to show you is worth it. We laid out the Polaroids and my sketches on the kitchen table. Marcus's eyes went immediately to the photographs, his professional skepticism wavering. "Where were these taken?" he asked, picking up the clearest shot of the caged creature. "About 3 miles northeast of here," Dorothy said. "Yesterday afternoon. That's a military operation." "Those tracks you found here in 1978, I said quietly. "You knew they were significant, didn't you?" He looked up from the photograph. "They were highly anomalous. Bipedal, but the gait pattern was completely wrong for a bear. My supervisor told me in no uncertain terms to file the report as inconclusive and move on." "Now you're wondering if he actually knew something," Dorothy finished. Marcus didn't answer directly, but the look on his face was confirmation enough. He moved to my sketches, studying them with growing fascination and horror. "You're saying there are 2 distinct populations, peaceful and aggressive?" "More than that," I said. "The aggressive population has been hunting the peaceful ones for decades, and they've formed some kind of partnership with the government. They're using that one as a tracker. Tomorrow morning at dawn, they're starting a systematic grid search." "Tracking what exactly?" Marcus asked, though I could see he was beginning to understand. "Tracking him," Dorothy said simply. "Follow us. We'll show you." We drove toward the cave system, the 3 of us crowded into the Scout. It was a significant risk, breaking 2 decades of secrecy, but we were out of options. I gave our signal at the cave entrance and called out into the darkness. "Sai, it's Rosalie. I have someone with me, a friend who can help us. Please, I need you to trust me." Indeed, after a long moment, Silas emerged slowly from the darkness into the beams of our flashlights. Marcus Webb gasped, an involuntary sound of shock and wonder. I watched his face cycle rapidly through disbelief, then fear, and finally something close to scientific awe. "My God," Marcus breathed. "He's real." Silas looked at me, his eyes asking clearly, "Is this person safe?" "This is Dr. Webb," I said to Silas. "He's with Fish and Wildlife. He can help protect you legally, but he needs to understand what's happening." I turned to Marcus. "His name is Silas. We've been sheltering him since 1963. He's intelligent, peaceful, and he has been running from his own kind for most of his life. We desperately need your help to stop them." Marcus was staring at Silas, his hands trembling slightly. "Can I approach?" he asked. "Ask him," I said. Marcus swallowed hard, then addressed Silas directly. "Sir, I mean you absolutely no harm. I am a biologist. I have dedicated my career to protecting endangered species. May I come closer?" Silas studied him, then made a slight beckoning gesture. Permission granted. Marcus moved forward slowly. "This changes everything," he said, speaking almost to himself, pulling out a small notebook. "If there are 2 distinct populations of an unknown hominid species, you might be one of the last of your kind." "We don't have time for a proper study," Dorothy interrupted bluntly. "The hunt starts in less than 9 hours. Marcus's expression shifted to grim determination. "You're right. First priority is protection. If I can argue that there is credible evidence of an unclassified species at imminent risk, I can file an emergency protection request. It would require a temporary halt to any activities that might threaten the species. It would create a legal record." He looked at Silas. "But I need evidence they can't easily dismiss. Photographs of him, something that proves this isn't a hoax." "Sai," I said carefully, "Dr. Webb needs to take photographs of you. It's to protect you." For a long moment, Silas did not respond. I was asking him to violate every survival instinct he had. Then he nodded slowly and stepped fully out of the cave entrance. It was an act of profound trust. Marcus worked quickly, taking shots from multiple angles. "I'll need hair samples," he said, pulling out a small evidence bag. Silas understood, plucking several hairs from his own forearm and dropping them into the bag. We were loading back into the Scout when we heard it. The unmistakable sound of a helicopter in the distance, its searchlight sweeping through the darkness over the far ridgeline. They were not waiting for dawn. The hunt had already begun. We made it back to the ranch with the helicopter still searching the eastern ridge. Marcus immediately went to his vehicle and pulled out a portable radio unit. "This is Dr. Marcus Webb, Fish and Wildlife Service, requesting priority channel with regional Director Patterson." Static crackled. Then an irritated voice responded. "Dr. Webb, it is nearly 11 at night. This better be critical." "Director Patterson, I am filing a formal species protection request under the emergency provisions of the Endangered Species Act. I have photographic and physical evidence of an unclassified hominid species. There is an active military operation in progress that poses an immediate threat." A long pause followed. "Dr. Webb, have you been drinking?" "Sir, I am completely serious. If you refuse to act on it and this species is harmed, you will be personally liable under federal law." Another pause. Then Patterson's voice came back colder. "Stand by." The radio went silent. "He's calling someone higher up," Marcus said, his face pale. The radio crackled to life again, but this time it was a woman's voice, clipped and authoritative. "Dr. Webb, this is Colonel Helena Vance, Department of Interior Special Projects. I believe you are currently at the Warren property." "That is correct, Colonel," Marcus responded. "A military operation that is none of your concern," she interrupted smoothly. "I am ordering you to cease all interference immediately. This is a matter of national security." "With respect, Colonel," Marcus said, his voice steady, "the Endangered Species Act supersedes national security classifications." "Doctor, let me be extremely clear." Colonel Vance's voice was cold steel. "You are interfering with an operation that has authorization from levels far above your pay grade. If you continue, you will be charged with obstruction. You could spend the next 10 years in a federal prison." Marcus looked at Dorothy and me, making an impossible choice. "Colonel Vance, I have already filed a formal protection request. If your operation harms an unclassified species, you are violating federal law. My career might be over after tonight, but so would yours." The silence that followed was profound. "You have absolutely no idea what you are protecting, Doctor," Colonel Vance said, something almost like amusement in her tone. "No idea what that creature really is, or what it has done." "What exactly do you mean?" I grabbed the handset. "This is Rosalie Warren. What are you accusing Silas of?" "Ms. Warren," the Colonel's voice carried that same strange amusement. "So you've given it a name. How touching. In your 20 years of sheltering that creature, did you ever wonder why it came to your property specifically?" "The winter storm in 1963, I said automatically. "He needed cover after killing 3 hikers on the Appalachian Trail," Colonel Vance said flatly. The words hit me like a physical blow. November 14th, 1963. 3 college students from Roanoke, found dead, torn apart, approximately 5 miles from your property. The scene was not consistent with a bear attack. You found him in your equipment shed 4 days after those murders, frightened, hiding. You saw a victim, not a predator. "That's not possible," I said, my voice weak. "Silas would never hurt anyone." "Is he? There have been 17 other incidents over the past 40 years, Ms. Warren. Disappearances, deaths, all with the same signature, and every single one traces back to the so-called peaceful ones. The aggressive population you observed in our camp, they are not the hunters. They are the solution. They police their own kind, track down the dangerous individuals, help us contain them before more innocent people die. We protect their territory in return." The radio went silent. We stood in the kitchen, the 3 of us, with the weight of Colonel Vance's accusations pressing down on us. Everything I had believed about Silas suddenly looked sinister. "We need to verify this ourselves," Dorothy said finally. If there are human remains in the cave, we need to see them. The three of us drove back toward the cave system. I called out for Silas, but there was no response. The cave felt empty. We pushed deeper into the mountain, into passages I had never explored, and then we entered a large chamber that made my heart sink. There were remains, backpacks and hiking gear scattered around, a Virginia Tech jacket from the early 1960s, a canteen with "at 1978" scratched into its side. But something about the arrangement was wrong. The items were arranged carefully, almost reverently, not scattered or hidden but displayed, and among them were carved wooden figures and stones arranged in deliberate patterns. "These are not trophies," Marcus said slowly. "This looks like a memorial. Someone was trying to honor these people." On the cave walls nearby, names had been scratched into the stone. Phonetic attempts at human names. Ellen, David, Susan. "He didn't kill them," I said as understanding flooded through me. "He found them. People who died in the forest from exposure, from falls, from accidents. He found their bodies and brought their belongings here. He was trying to remember them." A sound behind us made us all spin around. Silas stood at the entrance to the chamber, his massive form blocking the only way out. He moved to one of the memorial displays, the oldest one, and touched the items gently. He made a series of vocalizations that sounded unmistakably like weeping. Then he made gestures, showing falling, showing cold, showing finding. He found them during a winter storm. They were already dead. He couldn't save them. "Colonel Vance lied," I said, relief making me dizzy, or she deliberately misinterpreted the evidence to justify the hunting program. Above us, we heard the distant sound of multiple helicopters. The search was intensifying. "We need to get this evidence out," Marcus said urgently. Silas made an urgent sound and gestured toward the cave entrance. Danger. Close. Then he did something that broke my heart. He moved to one of the memorial displays and picked up a small carved figure he had made, showing a human and a larger creature standing. Together. He pressed it into my hand. Then he touched my shoulder one last time, our gesture of friendship, and turned toward a passage that led deeper into the mountain. He was leaving, taking himself out of the equation so we wouldn't be destroyed trying to protect him. "No," I said, my voice cracking. "Sigh, no, please." But he was already gone, disappearing into the darkness. He was protecting us the only way he knew how, by running. We made it back to the ranch, just as the sun was beginning to rise. 2 military vehicles were in our driveway, and Colonel Helena Vance was waiting on the front porch with 4 armed soldiers. "Ms. Warren, Dr. Webb," she said coldly, "you are all under arrest for interfering with federal operations." "We documented everything," Marcus interrupted. "The cave memorial, the evidence that you lied. If you arrest us, all of it goes public." Colonel Vance's expression did not change. "No one will believe you. Any evidence you claim to possess will be seized." We stood there in the grey dawn light, 3 civilians facing down the military, knowing we had already lost but refusing to surrender. Colonel Vance studied us for a long moment. "Here is what is going to happen," she said finally. "You will sign non-disclosure agreements. Everything you saw becomes classified information. In return, you avoid federal prison." She turned to Marcus. "Dr. Webb, you will be reassigned to a desk in North Dakota." She turned back to us. "The Warren sisters will sell this property to the Department of Interior and relocate. The creature you call Silas will be left alone. We will pull our operation out of this sector entirely." "You're offering us a deal," Dorothy said. "Why?" "Because messy federal trials attract attention," the colonel replied, "and because that creature saved your lives tonight without you even realizing it. Those remains in the memorial chamber. We did find them. Every single one died from exposure or accidents, exactly as you figured out. Your friend was trying to honor them. Her eyes were hard as flint. But if there is another incident, this deal is void, and you will not be here to protect him anymore. It was not justice, but it was the best we were going to get. We signed the papers. Within a month, the ranch was sold. Dorothy moved to Richmond. Marcus took the assignment in North Dakota, and I bought a small cabin in Tennessee, as far from the Blue Ridge as I could get while still staying in the mountains. I never saw him again. 20 years of friendship. All of it ended in one night. But on clear nights, I stand on my porch and look northeast, and I wonder if Silas is still there. Still hiding, still surviving, still maintaining his memorial to the people who had died in his territory. I like to think he is. I like to think that somewhere in the vast forests of this continent there is still room for mystery, for beings we do not understand. Because if there is not, if we have eliminated every shadow where wonder might hide, then we have lost something precious we might never get back. 20 years. It was not enough. It could never be enough. But it was something. It was real. And in the end, that is all any of us can really say about the time we are given. It was real, and it mattered. Even now, all these years later, it still matters to me. And maybe, if there is any justice in whatever comes after this life, I will see him again. My friend, my secret, my 20 years of impossible wonder. I have to believe that. After everything, I have to believe something. So I choose to believe in Silas. I choose to believe he found peace. It is all I have left to give him now. My belief, my memory, my stubborn refusal to forget. And on nights like this one, with the wind singing through the pines, it almost feels like enough. Almost.